Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Olu again from SecureAfrique podcast, bringing you cybersecurity news and trending all over the world, especially emanating from Africa and other side of the world. And it's a special occasion today because, in fact, I feel lucky because it's the first time we're having a host on this podcast, and even though it wasn't really planned, but this young man we have on the hot seat today kind of encouraged us, like, you know what, let's do this as a video, and even advised us on how to go forward. And so I'm really privileged. So without saying too much, I would like to invite Mr. Paavo Hamata, and I think I'll just let you introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Femi. I actually thought you had done one of these at least before. I didn't think I was the absolute first person to be hosted, so that definitely is quite a privilege for me. And I'm really happy to be joining you as well as your listeners. Like I mentioned to you previously, I was quite impressed to see that there's an African-specific podcast discussing African cybersecurity issues, because we certainly need more of this information being synthesized to virtually all of us. It's a very interesting field, and I think to be at the forefront of it with something like this podcast is an absolute great first mover attempt there. So myself, I am from Namibia, born and bred. My background is in IT audit. I've conducted IT audits for a large banking group across sub-Saharan Africa, as well as a couple of countries in West Africa. I then led the IT audit function for the largest listed banking group here in Namibia. My career then moved me into a compliance role where I was regulating a portfolio of financial technology companies, as well as managing operations of the national payment system in collaboration with the Central Bank of Namibia. I then moved to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where I was in the information security risk and control team of a global tech company, where my specific responsibilities was basically to lead all IT risk and control initiatives for the company across a few of its subsidiaries. So in my case, namely, that was the UK, Canada, Australia, as well as New Zealand. I then moved back home about a year back to start my own consulting practice, and I, in summary, really just took all the things I really liked doing in all of my previous jobs, and then created a business around this. So I offer a few IT risk and control solutions, which also include training. And one of the things that you saw that sort of made you realize someone like me exists out there was an article I had written about a cyber attack on one of our telecommunications companies, which I'm sure we will get into a little later on.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that brief description. I think you've taken the whole words out of my mouth. Just before I go on, is there any way you can just step back a bit?
Yeah, sure.
Camera is kind of cutting off your beautiful face. I want our listeners to know who's this handsome Mr. Paavo. So Paavo in the picture.
Thank you, Femi.
And I think you mentioned that you think I've been doing this for a while. Maybe I'm not saying the truth, that this is my first time. Well, this is my first time, but I've always been working with cameras. As you know, I'm a producer, so I'm always kind of, my director has kind of prepped me how to try and look good, at least for the camera.
That's cool.
So without wasting too much time, because I know you're a very busy man, and thanks for the description. And I think it's been really interesting to know you've been doing a lot of works around cybersecurity race and the whole 9 years. And as I reached out to you, the cybersecurity news across Africa, there's not really much podcast or webinars that talks about this thing. So we thought, you know what, I think there's an opportunity to be putting this out there so people can be known, the trending news about cybersecurity in Africa and globally in addition. So in regards to today, obviously, I think a few months back, the Central Bank of Uganda, was hacked. Apparently, almost $1 billion was stolen from the the central bank, which was the bane of the globe. And then also recently, Telecom, a company in Namibia, there was a cyber attack. So I think the question I was going to ask you was, can you briefly, in your own words, summarize the details of the Telecom cyber attack that happened in Namibia and its impact on its customer and the country as a whole? Please.
No, sure. I like the example you gave of the Ugandan Central Bank. I think another one that we may not have mentioned is Malawi. I believe their Home Affairs Ministry was also hacked, and the minister there flatly indicated that he considers that a national threat. And certainly Namibia faced its own national threat last month. On December the 11th in particular. So one of our telecommunications companies, Telecom Namibia, suffered your typical ransomware attack by Hunters International, who we all know is a very well-known ransomware group. And essentially what they did was exploit a vulnerability that Telecom Namibia had in its network. Some of their employees use VPN when working from home. And these hackers managed to get hold of the credentials of one of the VPNs, possibly through social engineering attempts, etc. And approximately over 600 gigabytes of data was exfiltrated from their systems, and that encompassed close to 500,000 files, which contain various sensitive information. So we're speaking about the IDs of various customers who had Wi-Fi packages, for example, the telecommunications company, addresses, banking records. All of this was information that was leaked because when they then asked for a ransom, Telecom Namibia flatly told them we don't negotiate with cyber terrorists. And exactly. So that's the response that they gave, and as a consequence of that, then obviously their data was breached, and in addition to being breached, was then put out there on the internet. So it started circulating on social media, in particular Twitter, or what is now currently known as X, and data, including that of our own president, was included in that.
President's data.
Our own president's data, as well as a few ministers, was included in that information that was breached and then exposed to the internet. So naturally, there was quite a huge customer impact. In particular, obviously, a lot of customers are now exposed to identity theft attempts, as well as financial fraud and very targeted phishing attempts, because now you have a lot of data around which you can perform really good reconnaissance of a target before you even decide what kind of social engineering vector you are going to use. So that public dissemination of personal data has certainly heightened a lot of these vulnerabilities in a country that was already beginning to see quite a lot of these phishing, social engineering, and identity theft issues popping up over the past few years.
I think I had another question I was going to ask, which is a follow-up, and obviously talking about the data privacy, the data breach from even to the number one citizen, the president. And you mentioned that, and how does this lack of regulation? Before I was going to ask how, could this be due to lack of regulations or non-strict adherence from the parastatals, from the companies, or just kind of lackadaisical attitude, like they don't really care, or they don't really put too much strong emphasis on security posture, or what would be the reason that leads to this breach?
So I suppose yes and no, right? The lack of regulation certainly is a contributing factor, but it's not the problem in and of itself. Even in environments like Europe and the United States, where you have, for example, GDPR in place, many organizations still face ransomware attacks and a whole host of other cyber attacks. So the regulations help, but they do not necessarily completely prevent cyber attacks from happening. So in the Namibian context, the reason I suppose I say yes and no is that what the CEO of Telecom Namibia did say was that as a mitigating, or rather as a corrective action to the cyber attack that happened, they will be ensuring that multi-factor authentication is enabled on all of their key accounts. That you typically have as a regulation, and one could then argue that had that been in place, the cyber attack wouldn't have happened because that VPN account would not have been available to be accessed had MFA been in place. But at the same time, even if it wasn't in place, there are still many other attack vectors that could have been used by Hunter International. So yes, it definitely is a problem in that because you don't have that legal framework, you don't actually have any enforced data protection and cybercrime legislation. And so many organizations will basically be operating without any clear obligations to implement any form of data security over the very sensitive data they hold of customers. We've got it, fortunately, within our banking space. We don't have it, for example, within the insurance space because we don't have a cybercrime or a data privacy act that is yet in place. And some of those industries also process very sensitive information. There's then obviously that issue around accountability, that once a cyber attack like this has happened, you remember when Uber suffered their own cyber attack, they did, or cyber breach, or data breach rather, they did have to pay penalties because of...
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, Telecom Namibia doesn't have to pay anyone any fine because we don't have any legislation that says they should, right? It means that had they suffered this breach and no one knew about it, they also had no obligation to inform anyone, right? And so customers could have been left quite vulnerable. And also because there's no act against customers, don't have any legal recourse as well in terms of what can we then institute maybe as a crime against Telecom Namibia, or if we have suffered damages because our data has been exposed, they cannot go to Telecom Namibia and claim for those damages because we don't have an act. So that certainly are some of the key impacts of there not being a data privacy act and obviously a cybercrime act as well.
And so is the legislature or the president, are they planning to form like a regulation surrounding this, so that at least going forward there will be some form of responsibility from the companies or the central bank of Namibia as the case it is right now? Is there something that is in the pipeline right now, or is still the same status quo?
Yeah. So Namibia does have a cybercrime bill as well as a data privacy bill. So these are not acts yet, they haven't actually been passed by Parliament, but they have been written. In order for this to be enforced, the Data Privacy Act, for example, requires that we have a data privacy regulator that would, with an entire team, to basically regulate data privacy in Namibia. So in enforcing an act like that, you also need to consider all of the other resources that it will take to actually have the act implemented. So those tend to be some of the things or stumbling blocks that do result in there being a little bit of a slower turnaround with regards to ensuring that some of these acts are enacted and legislated. However, because of how large this data breach was, it is expected generally, as consensus amongst many Namibians, that our expectation is that this year we will definitely see an acceleration on the enactment of these bills, because once you have data even of the president that has been leaked, I think people sort of realize, okay, this is a very serious issue and could get even more serious, especially one of our own telecommunications company, which is a key national infrastructure, is targeted, and it also represents a national security threat. So we expect that this will be resolved at least over the next 2 years.
Talking about that,
but I'm knocking on wood as I say that, Femi, because you never know.
yes. So I was going to ask that. So, what's the current state of cybersecurity awareness right now among the general public? Just in other African countries as well, including Namibia. What are the how would you rate the current status of the cybersecurity awareness?
Yeah, I would say it's relatively low, Femi. I think a key contributing factor to that is that we've seen a bit of a reverse adoption of technology. Whereas in areas like the United States and all of these Western areas, many people started off with computers and stuff, and then are becoming more and more mobile. We became mobile, and then are becoming more and more mobile, right? Yeah. So many people didn't actually go through the phase of learning technology from a computer level. To really acquaint themselves with some of the key risks that they may face in their use of technology. And internet is only continuing to increase now in terms of accessibility in Africa. So many people are only now also beginning to actually harness the power of the internet, which means they are not as aware of the risks as they are of the potential benefits of using a lot of these different technologies. Right, and that basically means that cybersecurity awareness generally on the African continent is quite low, and is low in Namibia in particular because we have limited digital literacy. So a significant portion of the population doesn't really have a very good understanding of digital technologies and all their associated risks, right? And there aren't many education initiatives either. So in Namibia, for example,
I think you're already going to my next question. I was going to ask that now that we need the awareness, that what needs to be done to better this awareness, raise awareness, so you can just carry on that trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly we need many more education initiatives, as opposed to finish off my last point. One, as a continent, we need to think about how do we ensure that from the time a learner goes to a primary school, they are being educated about digital fraud and cybercrime. Because, I was just speaking to a cousin recently about how it's strange that kids in grade 7 today have iPhones. I didn't even have an iPhone until I was in university, and back then it was a major status symbol, right? But today, someone in primary school would have an iPhone, and would, by virtue thereof, be exposed to various forms of digital fraud as well as cybercrime, just because they are connected to the internet. How do we ensure that at an early age we are already beginning to teach children to become cyber savvy, so that all of even these nefarious actors who specifically target children in online cybercrime are left wanting, right? So we definitely need to integrate cybercrime into the curriculum of many schools today, because it's really what is called for given the environment that we're in, and definitely more public education campaigns, which is really something that I would imagine any Ministry of Communications or ICT should be driving in their countries, to ensure that in whatever province or region and deep vicinity within their countries where we know people are making use of internet and are therefore exposed to potential digital fraud as well as cybercrime, that people are educated in their own languages, because it's obviously that language barrier. Many languages are spoken in Namibia, and then on the African continent significantly more as well. So how do we ensure that we're able to communicate that message and put it across in a language that people actually understand, so that they're actually able to have the intended behavior when they encounter a cybercrime or digital frauds scenario.
Thank you so much, man. I think we've been able to cover all the points that has been outlined. But just before we let you go, apart from being apart from you being so passionate about cybersecurity, GRC and the rest, what other things are you into? Was is there any other passion, any other side of it that you? I can see you laughing already. I think there's something like that you want to talk about that.
Yeah. My word. I suppose a big one for me is traveling.
Okay.
I definitely read, in fact, that Ghana is one of the first African countries now to abolish any visa requirements for African travelers who want to go to Ghana. So I'm very excited to potentially go there sometime soon. So I've loved the UK. I've done Manchester. I've done London as well. I got to watch Crystal Palace play against Man City, which was quite the experience. I've done countries like Poland, Italy, France, Portugal. I did a solo trip to Portugal at some point. Belgium. So quite a few countries. And traveling certainly is one of the ways in which I de-stress a lot. And outside of that, quite a bit of cooking. Having stayed for quite a while has meant that I've become quite a good cook. So that's certainly one of the...
You learned that over the internet, over YouTube? Or...
it started with the food channel, funny enough. And then
really? Wow.
Just able to create recipes from my head now. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that would be it.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for coming on SecureAfrique podcast, and I'm very sure this is a very, very exciting conversation. I'm very sure anytime we knock on your door to come on on board again, we'll be definitely have you again, and hopefully we'll be joining you at the upcoming cybersecurity seminar in Namibia. So hopefully, SecureAfrique will be sending a representative. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, not that we have a big team or anything. Yeah.
That's so nice. Yeah, but thank you so much, Femi, for having me. It was great to engage about a topic that's obviously very close to my heart, and I'm sure is of interest to your listeners as well. And as you continue to grow this platform, may you just continue to go from stride to stride and really continue to spread information that many of us really do want to access. So thank you very much for...
I think we are both in spirit right now, because I was going to say, do you have any word for the listeners? But you just crossed that part already. So thank you so much.
There you go.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Thank you, and have a great day. Excellent. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers for me.